Howdy and welcome to another show. It's been a bit of a crazy month as I've been on a bit of a road trip over the past few weeks with the ZWO team. We went to Las Vegas and then on to New York. I was lucky enough to get an invite from ZWO to attend the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas just after New Year. If you're not aware of what CES is, it's the largest consumer electronics show in the world, and it really was a huge event. 140,000 visitors over the 4 days, so it was a really impressive show. Huge space in the Las Vegas Convention Center. Very worthwhile if you can ever get the chance to go visit. So just after New Year, I headed off to LA and then on to Vegas for CES. We had an amazing time there, and the interest in Seestar was just incredible. At times we were 2 and 3 people deep at the stand, and it was just amazing to see people so excited about Seestar and people that have never been involved in astronomy at all. Of course, we also got a chance to explore a little while there, and we got out to see the Grand Canyon, which was pretty amazing to see. While I have seen this on TV and YouTube, I don't think you can even comprehend how big this landmark is until you're up front with it. We also headed out into the dark in Arizona near Kingman and did some imaging with a little Seestar 32 and enjoyed an absolutely fantastic steak there too. Now, Kingman isn't a huge place, but it has lots of character and a very welcome feel to it, and some fantastic locals, really inviting, and some pretty good steaks too. And it's dark at night, within a couple of hours drive from Las Vegas and a little closer to the Grand Canyon. It was a great place to stay. Although if you do pop onto the ZWO stand at NEAF or NEAIC, do ask me about the train tracks that we were completely unaware of till the middle of the night. And boy, do they make long trains out west. But, you know, it's all part of the adventure, of course. So after CES, I took a hop over to New York to present some product training, and wow, was it cold there after the warmth of summer here in New Zealand. It was pretty much down to freezing most days and well below freezing at night. So it's really been all go this past month, and that's not going to stop. Check out the news about NEAF and NEAIC at the end of this video as well. And I also managed to pick up a little bit of a chest infection while I was in the States too. So if my voice sounds a little bit strange, I'm still recovering from that. It was also great to catch up with Dan Higgins of Astro World TV in Jason, Kansas, another astro imager from Long Island. And of course, we got to enjoy some cocktails and another great steak in Midtown Manhattan. I can't wait for NEAF 2, and that's only a couple of months away as well, so do stay tuned for news on that. Oh, while we were at CES, I did a bunch of interviews for ZWO and some news channels and YouTuber channels too. I'll pop some of the links in the description below as well so you can take a look at those. And they also cover off some of the discussion around which Seestar you should buy, the Seestar 50 or its very capable little brother, the Seestar 30. So do go over and watch those if you've been mulling over which one to buy, or maybe you've bought both already. So we've been really busy over the past months with all sorts of testing, and that's really eaten into video time, so I'm running behind in the programming plans. But that's okay. It's been great to bring you new products like the 2600 Air, Seestar 30, the new camera angle adjuster, all of which I think will be very, very popular in 2025. And I've really enjoyed using them during testing, and I know you'll enjoy using them too. Speaking of the Seestar, I've been busy testing a new feature in New Zealand that should hit the streets in the next month or so, and it's one I think will make the Seestar even more popular. Some of you may have seen me posting about it already on Facebook, but I thought I'd do a short video on it as the team in HQ are busy developing it, and we're really keen to show off something really exciting for Seestar, and it's an area that we keep seeing requests for. And the position of this Seestar 30 is a clue as to what it is. So as always, let's dig into it. Now, if you own a Seestar 30, you'll be familiar with the way in which it moves. It's like a normal camera tripod. It moves left and right and up and down. It's commonly known as an alt-azimuth style mount, referring to the movement of the mount in altitude and azimuth axes. Now, this is quite different from other mounts used from astrophotography, like this Ioptron CM70. This mount also moves in 2 axes, but quite differently from the alt-azimuth style mounts. In this mount, the first axis moves in a circle that mimics the movement of the stars around the pole. It's known as the right ascension axis, or RA for short. Motors control the axes and move the mount at the same speed as the Earth rotates. This is known as the sidereal rate. This keeps the stars centered in the telescope as the Earth rotates, and this movement around the pole also gives the mount its name, the equatorial mount, or EQ mount for short. Now, as the telescope can only move in this arc, to reach a target we need to offset the telescope away from the RA axis. This is known as the declination axis, or DEC for short. So using this mount we need to know an object's right ascension and its declination position so that we can now point the telescope at it. Luckily that's not too difficult, as we have modern computing in our scopes and controllers to help you with the math. If you know your latitude and longitude on the ground, the local time, and the object that you want to observe, then using known astronomical catalogues and some maths, you can calculate where that object will be in the sky at any time. EQ mounts also come with an added complication in that the RA axes need to be accurately pointed at the celestial pole in your hemisphere. This is called polar alignment, and is the physical alignment of the RA axis to the celestial pole. In this mount, we physically move the mount left, right, and up and down using mount controls on the sides. Remember what I said here? It's the physical alignment of the mount axes. You can even do polar alignment even with it turned off, and you don't need to touch the hand controller during the entire process. Now, all this EQ stuff sounds complicated. Why do astro imagers use equatorial style mounts to get the best image versus the simpler and easier to use azimuth mounts? Well, it's really down to the movement of the stars across our night sky due to the rotation of the Earth. As we rotate on our axes, the stars move in an arc across the sky, and using a mount that can only move left and right and up and down means you need to trace an arc using two movements, for example, up and right. And you need to keep doing this to track the star, but that's not a smooth process. Two movements creates excessive movement and the potential for errors. When using an alt-azimuth mount for astroimaging, there are also some other downsides, such as field rotation. That is, as the night progresses, the object also twists in respect to our viewing point. And in our imaging system, this will show us areas on the Seestar images that have less overlapping data, usually in the corners of our images. Alt-azimuth modes also limits the exposure length too before you start to see star trailing, which will be a lot shorter than if you were using an equatorial style mount. EQ mounts, on the other hand, offer better tracking using one axis only and have limited effects of field rotation, but have that additional complication of needing to be polar aligned. So you can see why ZWO choose alt-azimuth mounts to make Seestar as easy to use as possible for newcomers. But it does come with some limitations, as we've discussed. Well before Seestar was finally released, the beta testers had been talking internally with the developers around the implementation of an EQ mode. But with a very long list of planned features for Seestar, it took a lower priority and it wasn't something that was being actively worked on. But I am pleased to say that the team have now taken up the challenge and are progressing work on an EQ mode for Seestar. I thought we'd take a look at the development work so far and review some of the results from our first EQ mode tests. And I have to say, if you thought the results from Seestar were good, you wait till you see what EQ mode can do. So firstly, how do you turn an alt-azimuth mount into an equatorial style mount? Well, that's not too difficult. This is just like adding a wedge to a fork-mounted telescope. The Seestar 30 here behind me is mounted to my iOptron mount, but here the mount is turned off and not being used. All the mount is doing is acting as a wedge. You could easily replace this and use a simple wedge like they used to use on star trackers instead. If you use a small wedge for a star tracker like the Skywatcher one, then you can mount the Seestar on the wedge to create an equatorial mounted telescope. The Seestar is mounted so that the body is aligned with the celestial pole. In the case of the Seestar 30, it's mounted with the body aligned to the pole and the power LEDs in the switch facing upwards. Mounting Seestar this way is rather different to the normal orientation, and ZWO are looking at how to create some accessories to help with EQ mounting. I've also seen some of you have been playing around with some workarounds for Seestar in EQ mode, and I've also seen some of you creating some alternative mounting methods too. But as we move towards a native EQ mode, we'll continue working on a solution for these, so hit that subscribe button and I'll bring you news as soon as we've got more information. Now, once the final implementation of EQ mode is made, you'll be able to switch into it via the app. I've been having to do a little bit of jiggery-pokery with some developer apps to get into it, but we're now making progress and it'll be much easier for you to switch into EQ mode. Once you're in EQ mode, you'll need to do some polar alignment and then you're ready to go. Now, ZWO is looking to implement some polar alignment tools as well to try and help make this step easier. It would be great to see if they can use the Seestar 30 secondary camera for this, so watch this space, and we have some ideas for Seestar 52. As we progress with EQ mode testing, you'll see regular updates from me as we step forward to a formal release. Now, I did see some funny Facebook comments recently about the Seestar development using someone else's code for EQ mode, which is kind of funny as ASI Air has had EQ mode built in since day one, and as Seestar is based on ASI Air, then it makes sense that ZWO already had the capability for EQ mode in its code base, so this really isn't an accurate statement. Once EQ mode is enabled and you're polar aligned, then you can jump into using the Seestar like you normally would do. In EQ mode, you can choose a target exactly the same way as you do now, and Seestar will know how to reach that object. It'll do a plate solve first to ensure its pointing direction is known, and then move to the object. Once on the target, it'll do a normal jiggle to center it. Once centered, it'll do its horizontal calibration, but of course in the EQ mode style. And then finally it does the normal camera calibration using dark frames, then it'll go back and center the object and start to image as normal. So in use, there's very little difference after the Seestar is polar aligned. One thing I have noticed in EQ mode is that once you do the first alignment, then going to a new object is much faster, and it doesn't need to redo horizontal calibration each time, and it still remains accurate as well. I've tested EQ mode on both sides of the meridian and it works perfectly, and of course tested on both north and south facing targets with equally good results. And of course it'll be fully tested on both hemispheres as well. We're still working on the fine-tuning of this feature, but so far it's been very impressive to see and to actually use. Now, before you start messaging ZWO with demands for early access, please understand, we'll release it into beta testing as soon as we can. The interface is not yet ready for external user tests, and there's still a way to go on the testing and tuning, so do bear with us and be patient. It'll be out when we're happy with all the test results from both hemispheres. What are the results like so far, and is it worth the extra effort? Well, the results are pretty darn good. Once you get over the hurdles of having to get a wedge set up and carry out polar alignment, EQ mode opens up a whole new level of Seestar capability. Firstly, you can expose much longer without trailing or drop frames. I've routinely been doing 30-second subs, and there's no sign of elongated stars in test images. Longer exposures are highly beneficial even if not using a cooled sensor, and without a doubt the exposure times will be opened up further. The sensors used in Seestar are pretty low noise, and longer exposure times means more data per frame and better signal to noise ratios. This is really nice when using the Seestar's built-in narrowband filters too, and you can image objects with weaker signals and still get nice low noise images. When using EQ mode, there's been little to no drop frames as well. Now, I am testing on a fixed pier here in the observatory, so I really wouldn't expect there to be any as it's really well polar aligned. But EQ mode will mean less trailing even when manually polar aligned, and maybe even when not perfectly aligned as well. One key area that EQ mode does help with is when observation targets are overhead. In alt azimuth mode, this is a real limitation as the mount can't track these well, but in EQ mode there's no issues here as the mount is already on its side. So it can easily track these, and so it opens up another area of imaging with Seestar. With EQ mode providing better options for longer imaging sessions, less drop frames and more useful data being captured, then framing mode becomes vastly more usable. Choosing a wider field of view in framing mode expands the imaging times needed to fill the chosen frame with data. But EQ mode really helps shorten the times to a minimum, and it also ensures that data is optimized to best effect. It reduces wasted drop frames and allows for minimal overlap. My experience using Seestar 30 so far in EQ mode testing is that you'll be able to do much longer imaging sessions and see little to no field rotation, and with much less drop data from star trailing. This opens up the possibility to image for much longer in wider fields of view and on much weaker targets such as emission nebula or dark nebulas, for example. But of course, all of that is at the expense of having additional setup time and some complexity, and of course some new skills required to manage things like polar alignment. But it's not insurmountable. We've been doing this with our normal astro rigs for a long time before Seestar came along. I'll be covering off much more on EQ mode as we progress, including details of those polar alignment tools. So hit that subscribe button right now to keep up to date, and click the like to show me that this post was useful to you. And of course, do let me know in the comments below how you plan to use EQ mode for your Seestar, and of course, which Seestar have you been planning to buy? Did you get a 50? Did you get a 30? Do you have both? How are you finding them? Really interested to see how you guys are getting on as well. There's still some way to go to finish the app and get it ready for the first beta releases, and some more testing to do in some parts of the feature. And also things like testing fringe areas like capture of frames without stacking. But the results so far have been very impressive, and I think it'll add a whole new dimension to Seestar, particularly if you're a more advanced imager who's comfortable with the more complex steps involved in running an EQ style mount. But don't let that scare you. We are going to make it as easy as possible, even for beginners, to use EQ mode. I hope you enjoyed this quick glimpse into this new area of Seestar feature development, and I hope it gives you a feel for the kind of work that's being put into making Seestar a tool capable of much more advanced imaging, and also closing that gap between being a great introductory telescope suitable for a newcomer, but also one that will find a home in the hands of more experienced astrophotographers. Now, don't forget that we'll be at NEAF and NEAIC on the 5th through to the 8th of April in Suffern, and the ZWO team have invited me along again this year, so I'll be there with the crew for both shows. Really looking forward to showing you much more of Seestar there as well. Hope you enjoyed our glimpse into the future. Do stay tuned for further updates on EQ mode. Until then, clear skies from New Zealand.